awake, aware.
So, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me on. It's
Yeah,
yeah, great opportunity, and it's good to speak to an audience that can hear what I've got to say and all of those things as well.
for sure.
Oh.
Yeah, so I read over your ebook and some of your other stuff, and I figure kind of get into some of your background and some more of the
Hmm.
basics, and then get into the more esoteric stuff a little bit later on. So, maybe to start out with, so you're a doctor of Chinese medicine, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that was the latest degree that I did, which was a few years ago now. That
Okay.
was the 5-year Chinese medicine degree with the acupuncture stream. Um, Before then, I'd studied body work. I actually did body work um, out of high school. I went and did a double degree in art science with a psychology philosophy major and some physics and other interesting things. And then switched. I had a back injury. I was overdoing it, burnout. You
Mm.
know, it was a
Mm-hmm.
double degree, a lot of pressure and trying to work to pay my way and all that kind of thing. Lifting boxes and did my back. So I went and had some acupuncture and went from being able to, hardly get up the stairs or walk around to touching my toes in one session, and thought, well, yeah, that's right. There's something in this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so my grandfather, my mum's dad, was a self-taught acupuncturist back in the 90s. Sorry, in the 80s even. And so I'd had some experience with acupuncture with him. And so I thought that's great, but I couldn't face the thought of another 5-year degree at that point. I figured, well, I've got to work sooner than that. So I went and did Shiatsu therapy, which is meridian-based body work. And that really set me up for future studies and confidence and ability to work with the body and sense the meridians and feel them in myself and get used to working in those kind of intimate spaces with people where they're vulnerable and emotional and those things. So I did that as my full-time gig for over 10 years, about 12 years, maybe 4,000 hours on the mat, something like that.
Mm.
And then during that time, I also went and did a 2-year transpersonal counseling diploma, really driven by the need for it. People were having these experiences on the mat where they would have emotions come up or traumatic experiences resurface, and I just didn't have the skills to deal with it. So I thought, well, I need to go and study something, and that course really opened me up to the work of Ken Wilber, Stan Groff, and those sort of massive figures in the transpersonal kind of world and integral world. And that's led me down a further journey along that path as well. So the work I do, I call a lot of it esoteric acupuncture and follow the work of Dr. Mikio Sankey. I really think of it as transpersonal acupuncture because we're working in that realm a lot of the time with those kinds of experiences. And definitely that was my own experience receiving acupuncture. Was I was going into dreamscapes and visionary experience, or seeing and feeling things happening that I could relate to as being part of that transpersonal dreamscape realm. Yeah, that realm. Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you said you started off doing a psychology and philosophy. Did you grow up
Yeah.
or did you grow up around this sort of stuff to begin
No,
with, or
that's why I was hungry for it.
okay.
I grew up in country Victoria, in a town with a population of under 1,000 people, so there wasn't a lot happening there. From there, I did go and study in high school at a boarding school for a little while as well. But my parents were atheist, and their
Mm,
parents were atheist. Um, so it was there wasn't much in terms of spirituality or belief system. They had strong values and ideals. Um, but my first experience of, say, going to a church was for a funeral. And in that space, I was intrigued by the things that were happening and the emotion that was present with the hymns and those kinds of things, where I think if you grew up going because you had to, it would be a different experience. So when I went to boarding school, I actually wanted to become an altar boy and do that kind of path for a little while.
Interesting.
And yeah, and I was in that for a little while, for about 2 years, and then kind of fell out for a few reasons, and went on a wider exploration and started reading things like Fritjof Capra's physics. And I was really into physics at high school, and maths, and I guess philosophy as well, spirituality. So I was looking for answers.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It,
that
it
was
sounds
my path.
it sounds like a very interesting path. I think a lot of what you hear these days is kind of pretty much the opposite of people,
Mm.
whose parents are religious and kind of being forced into a spiritual belief and then coming out finding themselves atheist.
Yeah,
It's kind of
which
funny.
which is a nice way to do it. And there is that polarization, and I think now we get that really common spiritual but not religious aspect, where people are looking for something that's spiritual without having the dogma attached, and that's certainly something I see a lot of anyway. So
Yep.
then, and that doesn't have to be a set path that's been established in the past. It might be moving into environmentalism, or some way of expressing deeper values, and relating to one another. And you find that, well, I seem to notice that a lot of the principles that pop up end up being the same as what the major religions at least say they're speaking about, whether or not that turns into practice or not. Things like, love one another, and be kind to each other, be compassionate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of those principles pop up where were you saying?
I think that's probably the core message of most of the major religions.
Yep.
Comes down to that basic of each other.
Yeah.
As a massive simplification.
Yep.
And that's, if you've done some exploration, or maybe you've faced some hard things, or faced your own mortality, and you come back to the place of, well, what's it all about? That existential kind of, why am I here? If you're looking for an answer and you don't have one, then love is a pretty good answer.
Yep. Yeah. Definitely. So the body work, you did that for how long did you say you did that for? 10?
Yeah, at least 10 years,
Okay.
full time. Yeah, probably closer to 12 if you count in. So I dropped in and out. I had a bunch of kids as well.
Mm-hmm.
So over that time, some of the time I was full-time carer for my kids while their mum went and studied, and then other times I was working full-time. So if you add it up, I'd say it was 10 years full-time, but it was more like 12 or even 13, 14 years if you look at the entire stretch.
And you said that's Shiatsu?
Shiatsu massage, yeah. So that's a Japanese form of bodywork. It's quite popular here in Melbourne. We've got 2 very good schools of Shiatsu therapy. So Shiatsu uses the same theoretical basis as Chinese medicine. Like when we did our theory classes, we bought Chinese medicine textbooks. So I was fairly across that. I was also studying Taijiquan at the same time, which is a Taoist internal martial art. So I was really getting into that way of looking at the world. And it's a very circular way of thinking about things, where, you kind of look at one theoretical paradigm, then another one, and they don't seem to match, and you keep going around and you get back to where you were, and it starts to make more sense, and you go around in these loops rather than this linear kind of building on the previous thing. To expand on it, it's more of a looping back on itself. And really the physical touch, and also the personal healing that I experienced at that time. The Shiatsu College was very nourishing for me personally, in terms of being able to have a place to do my own healing work, face some of the traumas I was carrying growing up, and those kinds of things. So I was in my early 20s, and that's a time where generally you're looking for something in yourself, or trying to work out, I'm an adult now, how do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was getting grounded, getting in my body, doing the body work, receiving it. Even giving Shiatsu, it can be kind of like going to a yoga class, because you're crawling around on the ground, and Yeah, the touching and getting in tune not just with your breath but with someone else's, and sharing really close space.
So you found the healing effects to be through actually giving the shiatsu, or were you receiving it as well during like your training,
Yeah,
or?
absolutely. So going to, like, I tell a lot of my clients and patients now to go and do the basic 6-month diploma course, certificate level course,
Mhm.
because it's a 3-hour class and you give an hour massage and you get an hour massage and you do some theory and other exercises.
Nice.
So there's lots of self-healing in that. And that was definitely a big aspect for me. Even one of the main things to do while giving is to make sure that you're in a healthiest state as possible. So, you know, what's your own diet like? What's your own energetics like? Are you doing some daily practice? And, you know, you're not carrying your own junk into the session, as you should do with any healing profession, whether you're a psychologist or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then also to watch your own posture. If you're holding and being in space with someone and you're carrying heaps of tension, there's that energetic transference that goes on. So, you know, if I'm trying to help someone relax their shoulders by massaging it, but mine are crazy tense up near my ears, it's not going to feel good. So the first thing is to drop into a space of relaxation and alignment and flow in yourself. You know, if you're trying to pay attention to someone else's breath and you don't know what yours is doing, it's much harder.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you gotta, I would imagine, come from a pretty solid place to have the space to provide that healing for people.
Yeah, and that requires doing the work yourself, which is, yeah, definitely the biggest thing I got out of it was the self-care. We had to do logbooks where we document our own daily practice, and we're encouraged to go and try a range of different things to see what worked. So people would go and do Qigong or yoga or meditation or all of the above. And, you know, personally, I shopped around every martial arts school I could find in Melbourne, and there's a few of them,
Cool.
to work out, you know, what was going to work for me.
Is that when you found the Taijiquan?
I'd been doing Tai Chi for a few years, maybe 4 years before I started at the Shiatsu College, and I was already an instructor with one school. The type of Tai Chi I was doing was, I guess, your old lady Tai Chi, you know, your typical granny you see in the park, doing the slow flowing movements, which was great. Gave me a lot of confidence teaching and patience as well, you know, working with people that a lot of them would be repeating the same move every week and not making progress. It would be seen week to week. It would be over years. And a lot of them were coming just for social reasons and those things. Then I was also training in a little bit of Aikido, a Japanese martial art, because I was studying a Japanese body work. It made sense. And I'd done about a year of Wing Chun Kung Fu. And since then, I've trained other martial arts, Hapkido and some of the French stick fighting, Lacan, and moved to a more martial stream of Taijiquan as well, where we do explosive self-defense movements, very acrobatic forms, or energetic forms, and a lot more partner work and drills and sparring and that kind of thing. And I trained that pretty fanatically for a while, like, you know, 17, 20 hours a week kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm really intrigued by that. I've heard Steve talk about the Taijiquan a little bit. I took a Qigong, Spring Forest Qigong. I think it's a more modern interpretation. I don't know. I took a short class, like a 4 or 5 week class, like a community ed thing around here where I live. And I'm curious to explore more, because I want to know. I mean, what do you think? So out of all those things that you've tried, like, what do you feel like is, if you had to just do one of them, what would you do? And what kind of things has it done for you? I'm sure it's hard to really summarize it, but
I can start by maybe telling you what drew me to it. So the Taijiquan that I study is got so much depth. You know, I first, maybe 5 or 6 years into training Tai Chi, looked into what was out there, and I ordered a DVD called Advanced Taijiquan, thinking I'd know something about it and would, have no worries with this. And I just couldn't follow it. The depth and the complexity that was in there was just beyond my understanding. So I loved it, and I thought, well, this is something I can see myself doing in 20 years. And it includes Qigong. Well, I guess Qigong is a broader umbrella term, because it literally means energy work. There's Qigong for everything, Qigong for cooking, Qigong for sleep, Qigong for meditation, Qigong for physical healing, for healing others. And the Tai Chi has that self-healing component, the martial aspects. So because rather than just being like a dance, each movement has deliberate intention behind it. If you're throwing a punch and you've thrown a lot of punches, your mind, your body, your energy know how to work in harmony to do that effectively. So then when you're doing it slowed down, even if you're doing quite a small movement, you still got the large mental or energetic or even emotional part of the movement. The chi still flows according to how it would if you would throwing that punch properly. So that sends the energy around the body as it would in a normal daily cycle. So we have these like diurnal flows as humans and in nature, and it's a study of patterns. So if I had to just pick one thing, probably the large Tai Chi form, the old Yang style of Tai Chi, because of its intricacy and its completeness, would be the reasons I would choose it. But the most fun thing for me to do is the Baguazhang. So Baguazhang is like the cousin of Tai Chi, I suppose. It's one of the other internal martial arts, and it has 8 animal styles which map to the trigrams of the Bagua, which form the hexagrams of the I Ching. So you get this left-right sidedness. So you get 8 times 8 makes the 64 hexagrams. And each of the 8 animals has very distinct personalities and can be used to bring out aspects of self, or balance out parts of self.
Wow.
Or work with different organs and aspects. And it does seem to match not just the I Ching, but integral theory. You can even map out where you are on the Myers-Briggs scale and find out, this is the animal I should learn first, and then go across and see what the pairing would be to bring you more into a central harmony.
That's
if you
based
have
on
someone
the personality test. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the animals have such polarized personalities across the axis. So you've got, say, the monkey and the bear, or the snake and the eagle. They're pairings across an axis. So monkeys and bears, they're both upright, kind of humanoid looking, 2 arms, 2 legs. But they're quite different in the way they behave. So the monkey form jumps around and it's really lively and wild, where the bear's kind of heavy and slow, but also ferocious, but really super grounding, where the monkey's jumping around in the air all the time. So if you have someone that's maybe overly grounded or overly like rigid, or living their life in spreadsheets, maybe they're an accountant or something, and you give them the monkey form to do, they'll find it hard and frustrating usually in the beginning, but then you'll notice very naturally their behavior in life will shift, and they'll break out in some way, and maybe take up painting or a musical instrument, or switch left side to right side in their brain activity, that kind of thing. So I've been working with Steve a little bit around this and looking at how it might match up to the Graves layers, because they seem to map to the I Ching a little bit as well. We don't quite have a complete understanding of that by any means, but it's definitely interesting to look at.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm gonna have to get into that, because that sounds like something I've been kind of dabbling in some Ayurveda kind of stuff, looking at the doshas, and that sounds like a familiar or a similar kind of feel. Obviously, there's fewer doshas and it's a different thing, but just the idea of kind of like getting to know your tendencies and actively participating in things that will kind of balance your energies,
Absolutely. I mean, know thyself, right? It's step one.
Yeah.
And also we like to tend to break things down as humans because it makes it safe to understand them. I'm in this category and I can do this, and I recognize this pattern in this person, and that's great. But there's also the Tao that can be named is not the Tao, and are we fooling ourselves by even doing that? But it is useful, putting things in boxes because it's handy.
Gives you a way to work with the things.
That's right.
And communicate them to each other. And
exactly. That's language, isn't it? And maps are super handy. If you've got some idea or you've seen the pattern, when it pops up again, you might know what to expect.
Yeah. Maybe we could backtrack a little bit. I just thought as you were talking, maybe it would be good if you have like some of the basic foundational things you could share about, like Chinese medicine, and Qi and the Tao, just for people who maybe like aren't super familiar. I know we're gonna kind of go into a bunch of deep stuff anyways, but just I don't know. I thought it might be good.
Yeah. So on a practical level, it's looking at ways of harmonizing with natural flow and patterns of change. So we look at patterns that appear at all levels. So just the way you can zoom into the body and see the spiraling of the DNA, and you can look at the galaxy and it has spirals, and certain patterns and flows seem to take place. And that nature of that flow from yin to yang and back again as a wave form happens in the yearly cycle from winter through to summer and back, or from nighttime to daytime and back. And even in the life cycle of birth, growth, and decay and death, that we have this natural ebbing and flowing. So ways of living in harmony with that flow. And if you just think of yin and yang, if things are in a really yang state, don't expect them to stay like that forever. There will be change and it will decline into a yin space. And if it's yin, know that it can become yang again. And the basic tenets of Chinese medicine are really just common sense. It's, are you getting enough sleep? What's your diet like? Are you eating the right sort of foods? What's your quality of your thought patterns? What are you thinking about in the day? What's your support systems like? How are you fitting into the world? Those basic things in combination. So that would be all of the post-heavenly Qi, in combination with your pre-heavenly Qi, which is what you came in with, your genetic lot, your coding you've entered the world into, and how those things interact, and how you can best make use of them, and avoid illness, or when you are faced with illness, how to deal with it in the best ways possible, is really a simplification of Chinese medicine, but it's just common sense. Yeah. And I mean, Chinese medicine as it is now, we have a very standardized and rigid medicine when you look at it, at least in Australia, from an educational point of view. We're learning what's called traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, which is actually a fairly modern interpretation formed up to around the 70s and documented, and by the Chinese Communist government as a complete "this is how it is" expression of the medicine, where traditionally, like before it was called traditional, it was much more of a mix, eclectic mix of, in Australia we'd call it bush medicine, or there'd be shamanic tradition involved, or there'd be some kind of spiritual aspect as well, where in the modern Chinese medicine, that's really taken out. There's not much, in the universities here, at least, we're not really taught much about Qi as something other than maybe capillary dilation and the mechanical effects of, once you stick a pin in, you get this to happen. So it's got that reductionist filter placed over it, where in the past, yes, there was this mixture of, I guess, folklore and mysticism mixed in as well. So kind of deciphering that space is pretty interesting as a Chinese medicine practitioner. And how do I, I'm not an expert on Chinese history, but how do I take that content and make it more integral and make it so it can be heard and useful to a range of different people.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
So I'm curious about your thoughts on acupuncture. The non-esoteric, just your average acupuncture you do with your patients. Like I've experienced for sure, like I decided to do it based on kind of being pushed into it from just life stress. Like I've been going through a really challenging change process that just drove me to seek out any types of things. And I had acupuncture on my mind for a while. Just I've been really intrigued by it in general and just like the idea of it. So I finally tried it out, and it's definitely been helping me like immensely. It's hard for me though to decipher between the different things that I'm doing and how much is it just kind of helping me come back to a baseline as far as my stress levels? Is it actually assisting me in the healing of the kind of deeper inner work that's going on throughout this process? And I'm just curious your thoughts on all of that and what you see with your patients and stuff.
Sure. So those things you mentioned, I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive either. To help one, you're probably helping the lot. And that what we tend to do in Chinese medicine is look at as big a picture as we can and zoom out. And there are a lot of different things happen when you stick a needle in someone. You do get that local effect of capillary dilation, blood flow changes. You get maybe histamine response, so there's an immune response, and the skin goes red, and different immune cells are released. There's some kind of nervous system interaction. You'll feel sensation differently. There's the release of all these happy chemicals, endo-opiates and so on. So you feel like the endorphin release, and that can help you move into a relaxed state. I also say that all acupuncture can be esoteric, and that includes things that aren't obvious, that might be considered hidden. And that might be just your interaction with your acupuncturist. Do they make you feel relaxed just when they're in the room? What's their ability to build rapport with you, and how are they putting you at ease? Because that's really the biggest part of treatment, even in psychology. It's the client therapist relationship that's the key determinant of outcome. So all of those things definitely play a factor. In Australia anyway, and I think it's quite similar in the States, there's this dry needling debate going on where physical therapists are using more acupuncture and looking into the science behind trigger point therapy and dry needling muscle release, and seeing that it's very effective for physical work in terms of pain relief and those kinds of things, and as a potential solution to the opiate crisis and a whole bunch of things. And that is like really important. And I'd say it's at least in the past, being one of the main reasons that people will come and see me is because they're in pain or distress of some kind, whether it's they've got a shoulder injury, or whether they're carrying grief, or period pain or headaches, or whatever it is. It's usually pain is the reason that actually gets people on the table. And then once they're there, a whole bunch of other things show up, because these things aren't usually in isolation. That's usually part of a bigger picture. And there is this psychosomatic emotional relationship to between the body and the mind. In Chinese medicine, we really look at the body-mind as a complete aspect, that we don't separate them. So if someone comes in with a sore shoulder, maybe it's reflected in their inability to reach out for something in their life, or to do something actively with that part, or it can be related to the meridians that flow through there, which can be about the heart, or about the lungs and grief and a whole bunch of things. So there's this interconnectedness between the body and emotion, which I think is often overlooked. Less so now. It seems to be more in mainstream knowledge, but it's one of the first things I'll ask someone if they come in with anxiety or stress is where is it? Where in your body? Where is it? Can you point to it? And they almost always can say yes. It's here, or it's here in my shoulders, or it's here in my belly or my heart. And then that gives me a whole lot of information around what to do.
Yeah, I think you're right that it definitely seems to be becoming more common that people are open to the idea of the connection between, you know, the psychology and the emotions and the body and, you know, with disease and with any types of disorders like that. You know, it seems like a lot of the resistance kind of I've heard is around almost people feeling this sense of like you're almost shaming people or making them responsible for, especially if it's like more extreme, you know, more severe illnesses like cancer or things like that. You know, it can be a touchy subject where people feel like, oh, you know, you're making people feel like it's their fault or whatever. But I can't help but just feel like, how could you possibly separate the way you're being in the world from a disruption that's manifesting in your body? You know, like.
Absolutely. And it's often the way those things are responded to as well. Like I see quite a few people with cancer, not as their only course of treatment. I wouldn't be doing that, but always they'll have a story. They'll have a sense of what's gone on. They'll have thought about it at least. They'll put some mental energy into why me? Why has this happened? And it might be because they're working in a place out of cell tower right next to it. It might be because they were exposed to some sort of chemistry. It might be because they were carrying a lot of emotional stress. And definitely one lady I saw recently who won't mind me talking about her case, she had breast cancer, and she was, after a year of treatment, she's in remission, but she was so happy to have gone through that experience. Like actually grateful and overjoyed for that chance to make huge changes in her life, reassess what was important to her. Her relationships with her kids have completely changed around. Her work life is very different, and the things that she was concerned about have changed a lot. And I mean, that's like a fairly ideal kind of outcome.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case, of course. But yeah, how those things are approached, and even death itself as a relatively taboo topic. You know, we're all here as living beings, but with that is death. You know, life is a terminal disease, and it's what we do in that space while we're here. That and how we treat each other and care for, you know, the planet we're on, and what we do with our energy and our time. That's what matters. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
So how, you know, when you work with people, how much are you going off of? I mean, like you were basically telling me as you were talking, you know, the relationship with the person who's, you know, providing the service is one of the most important things. And, you know, what methods do you use to try to know how to most effectively, you know, needle someone? I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's a bunch of your actual technical knowledge in there, but
I'd say the first one is listening, and it sounds pretty obvious, but if you can listen to people and what they're saying and all of the different ways they're saying it, you know, often we're telling ourselves a certain story about something that may or may not be true. But we also have other ways of listening in Chinese medicine. So it might be we have quite a sophisticated way of feeling into the pulses, or we say listening to the pulses. And the person's pulse will tell you a lot of truth as well. You know, you can have someone that maybe they seem calm and relaxed, but they've got this bounding, racing pulse. You know that there's actually some heat or agitation or something going on that's causing them a bit of upset. Or they might tell you a story about what they're doing with their diet. And, you know, I've been to some herbalists especially that can pretty much tell you what you had for breakfast by feeling your pulse. It's really quite astounding. Posture, you know, listening and feeling it into someone's posture. When we do counseling techniques, we'll do like a active listening reflection where you might adopt the posture to mirror someone, and feeling how it is to be them in that sort of shape, and can tell you a lot about, or if I was feeling like that, how would I correct that? You know, what would I do? How would I change my breathing, or what would I need to adjust? And even just putting your hands on that place and someone bringing their awareness to it can create a shift just in itself. And listening in a way that gives someone freedom to share. And this has been a really big one for me around being open to hearing whatever someone's got to say. Because usually by the time someone's come to see me, they've seen a bunch of other people, and usually regular GPs and so on as well. And they've got in with this general pattern of they're not happy, something's going on, or they're uncomfortable, or they have a feeling that's hard to describe. But I'll get them to describe it, and tell me about how that sensation in your head feels cold or prickly, or what it is, what's going on. And through that process, I can usually get a lot of insight, especially if it's if they feel like, oh, am I going to sound crazy if I say this? It's those things that just give so much information, and building a relationship where people feel okay to share that stuff. That's probably the most powerful out of everything that I do, in terms of building that relationship.
Very cool. So what is your idea of what's actually going on there? I mean, that's a very hard to answer question, but I mean, from my sort of feeling when I get acupuncture, it very much feels like kind of what I've heard, which is, it feels like your body energy just by its nature wants to flow effortlessly through the entire system. And for whatever reason, through traumas and things, ways that your behavior was patterned dysfunctionally to try to protect you from pain, or to keep you to survive as a infant and through childhood, you form these ways that you block off that energy flow, or resist it in certain ways. And the needling seems to just sort of allow, even for a temporary, time, allows that energy to flow more freely through and just kind of cleanse things out and open things up.
Yeah, I really love the way you described that, and that flow state is something that we're really looking for. That's the ideal result after acupuncture is nice, smooth, even flow, because that sense of flow is related to it's related to all of the elements and all the organs, but specifically, most specifically, the heart. In Chinese medicine, the heart's considered the emperor, and we have this idea of following the heart's path freely. And when the heart's feeling like it's on track and it feels safe and content, you feel in flow. So looking for what's that feeling? When has that occurred in your life? And can you remember it, and can you recall it, and bring that into your real felt sense, whilst having the backup of the needle and energetic flow and release of blockages and tonification of deficiencies and clearing of excess and all the technical things we do to bring about that flow state. And in that space, because it really is an altered states technology, it might be sometimes a subtle altered state, but sometimes it can be quite a substantial, even psychedelic type experience having good acupuncture, is that those things that have been there in your story, in your history as blocks, will surface. That can be things like trauma, or even mistaken beliefs and ideas of you thought it was this way when it's really that way, and you've been telling yourself this BS story for so many years. And this is common experiences. You get a chance to face that stuff, those obstacles, and you could say the obstacle is the path as well, to reconfigure your own energy, psychology, emotional being, so that you can then face those things with more clarity, having experienced it from a flow state. So that's some of the work that's deliberately brought up, is to even push people into some darker or heavier experiences, when they're in that really flowing space, can be a powerful way to bring about change.
Yeah, that's interesting how you say that. It makes me think about this. Have you heard of internal family systems therapy?
Um, I've seen family constellation therapy, where they use like little dolls and they have them talk to each other. The internal
I,
family systems. Is it
I,
related to parts of self, or is it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
similar to that, but it's more just you don't use any dolls or representation.
okay,
It's literally just sort
yeah.
of like communicating with different parts of yourself. And the idea is that there's a core self, like a capital S self, that has these natural qualities of like compassion and curiosity and calmness and clarity. And so the idea is to cultivate that self, and then you can communicate through these other parts. And in that safe environment of the capital S self, it allows like a natural healing capacity to happen when you witness old memories and stuff. And it
Mm,
really reminds me of the same concept you're talking about, where like, you know, when I when the acupuncture session really kicks in, like you do find yourself just naturally brought to this space of calmness and clarity, and where, yeah, some of the things that maybe were bothering you can still kind of exist, but they don't seem to have the same, there's a distance a little bit, or you can witness them maybe more. And so you're kind of saying there's a natural healing in that, in and of itself, as being able to kind of witness these same things, but from a different state of consciousness.
absolutely. I mean, we are complex beings. Half the time we're asleep in this dream world where that kind of stuff's going on all the time. So being able to do it in a way where we can guide it and direct it and set up a certain thing, by even articulating and knowing what those different parts are, having that identity of this is the frustrated me, or this is the sad me, or this is, the compassionate me, and being able to take on the shape of those different aspects, mentally, emotionally, even physically, and then have them dialogue with one another and see what their needs are and how they're being met or not, and what the relationships internally are like. So we have in Chinese medicine a system of 5 elements, which relates to the organs, and then each organ has a identity around its emotional expression, those kinds of things. So that's a really nice way of looking at that as like clear categories. And they have elemental aspects too. And there are some acupuncturists that work purely with the 5 elements.
Mm-hmm.
And watching their client-patient interaction, if they're doing a demo and that kind of thing, you'll see the 5-element acupuncturist up the front, and then they'll do the meeting with the client, and within seconds their posture's different, and they're authentically meeting the person from the place where they need to be heard. So that might look like quite a sudden, forceful kind of greeting and a authority sense, and very direct. Where if that was for that might be for the wood element that needs to experience that. But if that was for someone that had an earth element tendency, that would seem like, oh, that's too much. I can't experience that, because they need to be met with more of a sympathy and understanding and gentleness. But if you approach the person that really needs the wood element from that really sympathetic and peaceful and slow and understanding, sweet kind of place, they might think, oh, that's pathetic, and not be able to relate to that person. So yeah, you've been able to adapt your own energetics, takes that self-knowledge and personal understanding, as well as ways of really quickly picking it up in someone else. And the really good 5-element acupuncturists do that really well.
That's amazing. And that's just to build the safety and trust and create that space for the person to.
It's part of the treatment too. One of the classics of Chinese medicine says that the patient's healing should begin as soon as the first meeting occurs. So it's before any needles or herbs or any diagnosis or anything. It should be in that first initial interaction. And I know myself in some experiences, you know, if I've gone to work with a shaman or something like that, it might be in the days in the lead up before then, or it might be in the phone call or the first meeting, or the what pops up in my life leading up to that first meeting. That's also part of the healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, maybe it's a good time to start going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I am really fascinated by the esoteric acupuncture, and like you said, all acupuncture has some esoteric qualities, so it's probably not a real hard delineation in your mind if I use that word correctly.
Mhm.
I think the first thing I'm curious about for myself is so when I was reading your ebook, there was a point there where you said something about you know, you're kind of assuming that a person has done a lot of inner work and is very familiar to, so is this a
it's
build-up process? Do you start out with the really simple patterns for this?
definitely. So there are some really simple shapes that
So
help
maybe,
understand.
sorry to
Yeah.
cut you off. I realized just now as I'm saying this, I haven't asked you to explain anything about what it is. So maybe you could
Okay.
first and then go
Let's
into
do
why
that
we
first.
build
Okay.
it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So the system of esoteric acupuncture is has been brought forward by Dr. Mikio Sankey, who's a Japanese American acupuncturist living in LA. And it's an elegant synthesis of the East and Western traditions. So just as we have ideas pop up around the world, whether they're archetypes or whatever, the ideas that are similar in many places, they seem to have common elements. So he's brought those common elements together in an acupuncture system that is described as having the purpose of personal and planetary evolution. So knowing that we're at this time in the progression of humanity where there's a huge potential for change and change is really speeding up, that we are having to adapt to that in new ways. You know, we're faced with a whole bunch of new information that we never had before. Communication technology has gone through the roof. We're faced with a bunch of different value systems, chemistry, all sorts of stuff, field interactions that were never there before. So our consciousness is adapting. And with that, we also need to have a shift in our energetic systems. So the esoteric acupuncture patterns map out some of those transitions and provide a clear pathway of things to do and things to follow to help make sense. And they also are designed to help the emergence of some of the latent human potentials and capacities that we have. So things like high sensory perception, intuition, inner knowing, clairvoyance, clairaudience, direct knowing, and even they induce just on their own a fairly altered states type of experience, which then can lead to a perspective shift. So you can then look at, you know, situations or traumas or whatever from a new point of view. So that's the gist of what they are. So the point sequences are called new encoding patterns. So they're new in that they're for the new evolution, the new human, and they're encoded because they're sequenced. They are each point, even in Chinese medicine tradition, each point has a story attached to it. So, you know, if you look at the acupuncture point that's directly over the center of the chest, it's about the heart. So that can tell you a lot about the function already. So the points tell a story. You have a point on top of your head, which is about connection to higher self, being the highest point on the physical plane. It's the beginning of grounding into being a human, but it's also that bridge into cosmic consciousness and infinite possibilities and things that are unmanifest. So we then sequence the points and connect the dots with with a very simple kind of wireframe kind of imagery connection to begin with. And then those shapes, which are sacred geometric forms in that they're made of triangles and kind of ordered patterns, the way sacred geometry is. They then can have a spin that's suggested by that vectoring of patterns between the points, and the interrelationships of the different points also tell a bigger story. So if you take that point that's on top of your head and connect it to each of your palms, you have a relationship between that higher self aspect, and the center of the palm is about, it's called Laogung, which means place of work. So it's a place of connection and interaction. It's where we make, break, and create and have that personal ego identity expression. So it's like a higher self, capital S self, and a smaller self. And then you can see that makes a nice big, obvious, like triangular shape. So you can just do that as a meditation. And then you also got the opportunity to encode those points. So each of those points is considered to be a gateway to something, or a spin point. So a container of information, or an ability to tune to specific information, but then also exposing it to what do you want. So you can put whatever you like in there, but we tend to, in esoteric acupuncture, use the heart frequencies. As I was harping on about before, that love conquers all kind of idea. And if you've got to have some purpose and you're feeling empty, then love's a pretty good one. So calling in that real felt sense and remembrance and experience of love, or one of its many other forms, compassion, or even wisdom or flow state, what that feels like, and placing that information with the point together to allow them to communicate or resolve or bring up blockages or move into a more harmonious way. And then you can also fill in the entire shapes. So once you've got that triangle there, we know triangles are nice structures that are containers of information, and that they're signatures for tetrahedrons, just like water has a tetrahedral molecule and can be used as storage of information and resonance and memory and vibration, that the triangles and tetrahedrons also that are created can then hold that information and then act as a internal guidance or moral compass or sense. Should I take this path or this path? If you're in a state of resonance with your heart will just know with a capital K, that knowing by heart, that's the right thing and that's not. Yeah.
So do you do like an active visualization to fill up that container with your desired sort of intention then?
Absolutely. So it can be used very deliberately like that. So I guess there's a yin way and a yang way of working with this stuff. So there's that real deliberate, I'm going to call in what I want. Or there's also more passive, I'll make the connections or allow the connections and then see what emerges. And both are very relevant, and it's a nice thing to do, even both in the same session. If we were just to connect that top of the head and the palms to make a simple triangle, and just hold that space in a meditation. In meditation, sometimes you can have the concentration element where you place your mind deliberately on something, on the focal point. Here's some focal points. And that engages the rational mind because you've given it something to think about. You've got some visualization, creative feeling aspect as well, because you're filling the triangle with felt sense. So that bandwidth of your mental space is now taken up, and then that allows for that emergence of deeper content or some of the trans-rational aspects to start popping in, or story or whatever's there. And that particular shape's a really nice one to do because you can then connect each of the three corners into the heart and then bring that heart point into encoding back out to each of the three corners and even project it forward in front of your body. So you do have that imagined tetrahedron kind of shape. Yeah, like a pyramid with three sides at the bottom. So it's got four sides total, where the regular pyramid has a square base. So tetrahedron, and then fill that imagined shape. So if you had a drawing of that tetrahedron that was 2D, and your ability to imagine the geometry shift to make it 3D. You're doing the same in your body. So you've really moved to a multidimensional awareness. You've got the ability to perceive more stuff in the same amount of space. So packing that shape, which is now at least 3D, with that feeling, and using it as a container of information of the heart frequencies, and telling that story of, I want to create a connection between my higher self, things that aren't manifest yet, into my manifestations through my palms, and have it all centered on my heart. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah. They tell these really nice stories. So that particular pattern is one of the first ones that people tend to get given, and it's a nice clear shape. And it's a great orientator as well, because it's got that heart leading forward feeling that when it's encoded, it feels safe, it feels protected. And often when I'm doing this, especially with groups, I'll have them work with it together as a pair and see that sort of field interaction that comes in, and have it activate them in themselves and draw it out of the other person, and then see how it is to throw it and project it at the other person. And then sometimes I'll play some like quite intense kind of even psytrance sort of music over the top of it, so they feel, I tend to work with a lot of crystal healers, Reiki practitioners, and people that might be typically a bit soft, and then I'll throw this, heavy music at them, and they'll stand there and just take it and just be at peace with this kind of overwhelm of sound information. Because it's all information with very beneficial things. I'll use something like, I really like Galactic Mantra by Itom Lab for that particular process. It's just this back to back row of affirmations, and it's all beneficial stuff, but it's kind of in a way that's challenging as well. So having people be activated in that space is a really nice one. In a group, often I won't even use needles for that. That'll just be even touch, or just their own, just bring your mind to that place, do it as a guided meditation.
So is the heavy music, or when you say like activation, is there something about you want to kind of push it a little bit, like get them in somewhat of a heightened state?
Absolutely.
What is that? Why is that exactly?
It depends on the who and why and the circumstance.
Sure. Yeah.
But the last time I did that was in a conference with 150, 180 people or something like that, and I had 20 minutes to showcase what I can do, kind of thing. So it is a meditation. When you meditate, it's great if you're on a mountaintop or a temple or something like that. You can get into nice spaces, but can you do that under pressure when you really need it? So that was part of the intention there. Last night I did a 13-point pattern for a group of 10 people, and in that space I played some heavy tribal shamanic sort of music to build that tension, and then we like spaced the width out, and I played some Pink Floyd, and then we went back and did some more like relaxation, ambient sort of Sibient music at the end. And it kind of helps take them on a journey of a little bit of pressure and tension to sort of surface things. And then some kind of almost retrospective kind of feel was last night, because that was also the energy of the group, and the evening just had that feel about it. And often I won't know what I'm going to do until the time.
Yeah.
And we also did like live shamanic drumming and sound healing and tuning forks and essential oils and all that other good stuff too, because that's all also information. That's all, whether it's olfactory through the smells or whatever.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it's basically the same idea and process of the regular acupuncture treatment you would do for people, but it's kind of a next order, like a next octave almost. Like maybe
I think so.
A regular acupuncture is working with a little more dense energy or something. And esoteric is like starting to refine even more. Is that accurate?
And that's a good way of putting it too. Like if someone's coming because they're sick, I really don't offer them esoteric acupuncture. If they're well and they're coming because they want to enhance their existing spiritual practice or something like that, then esoteric acupuncture is clearly the thing. But having said that, you put in one of these encoding patterns, and it'll surface stuff, and it'll also bring things into harmony very quickly. And there's one of the esoteric acupuncture courses, we learn chakra diagnostics, and there's encoding patterns for each of the chakras and things, and you can see what's out in terms of the chakra energetics. And then you test it by putting in one of the encoding patterns. It doesn't even look at the chakras. It just brings the subtle bodies into more cohesive way of being. And you retest the chakras and they're all spinning the right way again. Or the person, because the whole person relaxes, they've moved, you see a shift. You see a visible shift in breathing, in posture, all of those things, tension. And something's happening.
So I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but I know I'll probably kick myself if I listen back and realize I didn't ask you. How do you actually test chakras? Curious about that.
Yeah, so there's a few methods that I've been exposed to. The pranic healing school that I studied at, they'll do a test by feeling the subtle body with the hands. Another school will use pendulum dowsing, so holding a pendulum over the chakras and see how the pendulum swings, and try not to move it intentionally. Just allow whatever flows there to start to move it. And I was so skeptical of that for such a long time, but now I use it all the time.
Really?
And I had to go through a phase where I would tell myself that it's my I'd try and hold it as still as I could, but it would still spin. And I'd say, it's micro movements guided by my somatic systems, and till I could accept rationally that there must be a way for it to be moving. And then now I don't bother with any of that, and I just accept that it's moving and what the quality of it's like, and look at other things. You can do like your kinesiology muscle testing to test what chakras are out and those kinds of things. And there are some other technologies now which supposedly can give you a reading of where your chakras are at. But then there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So
sure.
I tend to go with feeling, and I'll ask for confirmation. Does that feel right with the person as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's looking for that flow, that's the thing we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that I've been just, I don't know what I've been surprised maybe, or pleasantly surprised, and it's just been a thing that I've pondered is with my acupuncturist. I have a pretty good connection with him, and I'll often find myself thinking about things that I want him to address, and I won't end up saying it, and he'll needle like exact spots that I was wanting him to needle, and I was like, how are you doing this? So that's really cool. But the esoteric, so it's not necessarily black and white, like you have to be in some really well state looking to advance your consciousness to start some of these basic shapes. You can be maybe going through a difficult transition period in your life or something, and trying to work on some more gross level healing, but also start to do some of these basic shapes.
Absolutely. Very much. I'll use them for people with some like mental health issues, or just emotional health issues, even pain. Normally I'd say, if someone's sick or in pain, I won't use them. But if you've been in chronic pain for a long time and you've tried things, and maybe you've had some regular acupuncture and it's just not doing it, sometimes being able to shift your psycho-emotional state can just give you that relief that even painkillers and those things can't give you. Because there's that cycle that happens when you feel terrible and you're tired and you're grumpy and you're in pain, and then that makes you more tired and you feel more terrible and you're in more pain, and it just spins and spirals out of control. So to shift someone out of that kind of chronic state, or depression, if they've been down for a long time, this could be something to try. Or just that sort of feeling of stuckness when they can't even remember what flow's like and just need a recalibration. And I do find a a lot of parallels between, say, the psychedelic therapies that are kind of gaining more recognition and the esoteric acupuncture treatments, because the descriptions people have afterwards of I was able to go back to my brother's funeral from 10 years ago, or I saw all these shapes and they were amazing and they brought out these feelings in me, or the content that people have seems to have a lot of crossover with those psychedelic experiences. Or even what someone say the other week, they said, "Oh, I just saw the big guy speaking." They had this enlightenment experience on the table, and
Wow.
just not surprised by any of it now, and open to it and welcome it.
So the shape you were showing, the palms out, is there a name for that one?
Yeah, so that one's integration synthesis. So it's a mathematical term coined by Buckminster Fuller, and it's about that human capacity to instantly make sense of stuff. Like at any given moment, there's huge sensory input from, right now I've tuned it all out, but can be aware that my socks are a little bit tight today, or that it's a little bit cool in the room, or that this light's a bit glary on me, or whatever, all at once. But like living next to a freeway or a waterfall, just you start to tune it out, so it's not relevant. But when you can open to new sensations, or maybe you're faced with new situations or information that you haven't faced before and have to just make instant sense and make a quick judgment, this pattern's like a great energetic triage. Like even the shape tells that story of it's pointing up, so it's got affirmative qualities. It's saying yes, and gives you structure, gives you that feeling of being supported and solid. It's got the larger, the base is at the bottom, so it's got that solidness and density feeling at the bottom. It's heart-centered. It tells a story that we described between the points, and the shape of it, it's like useless information can bounce off, and the beneficial things can be gathered and condensed into that space. So that's the pattern. It's called integration synthesis. And
So cool.
Yeah, Mikio tiers the patterns. He breaks them down into sort of 5 layers that they should be progressed through, and that's a tier 1 kind of initial learning experience kind of pattern. It's a nice one to do, once people are in it, especially with needles, especially in a group. It's really common to get like spins happening, rotations, clockwise or anti-clockwise, or forward or back, or more than one of those things simultaneously, like quantum. Sometimes the shape will collapse in on itself into nothingness, or expand out into infinity, or into like larger honeycomb patterns or something else. So yeah, stuff happens. Like once you've got the pattern locked in, the shape's there, it's now got its own geometric intelligence. It kind of just knows what to do because it's coded. So you can just kind of let the app load up and run in the background and see where you go. Yeah.
So those are things you feel, and you feel them, you perceive them as they're like making changes and shifting and sort of working on you, essentially.
Yep. So yeah, I'll often say to people, like, consider that the shape has its own intelligence now. It knows what to do for you. You've told it. So just see what happens. Like, you don't have to sit there just holding focus and concentration on the points the whole time. Once you've kind of feel like they're active, or your mind's clear, like if you focus on any of those points for a length of time, it's your neurological activity will change. It'd be like you stick a needle in somewhere, you can see in an fMRI the part of the brain that lights up in the sensory motor neurons. So mapping them together, activating them with your mind, you've lit up those parts of the brain. The psychology that's related to them somatically should naturally emerge. Your felt sense that you've dropped into. So I won't just needle the points, I'll needle them and have them resonate them with their heart energies, come into that, when was the last time you remember being in flow, that kind of wording. Or I'll play, appropriate music, maybe quite emotional music, or relaxing music or
Yep.
not so relaxing music
Mhm.
intentionally
Mhm.
to help with the process, just depending on what the person needs.
So is that something, I think you already said that yes, but is that something, you could practice by, even if you weren't needling yet, just by visualizing these, and kind of even maybe touching the points to start with to kind of,
Absolutely. So in like bigger groups, I can't get around to needle everyone. Like I did one out at Uluru where we did 40 people with a 25-point pattern in like under an
wow.
hour. And there's no way I can't do that many needles in that time and do it safely and cleanly and all the rest. So I just touch the points, and that's ample. Sometimes we'll use some of the energy tools like crystals, or even just lead it as a meditation. There's also that resonance that happens between people. So by activating the points as clearly as I can in me, it helps other people get it more easily.
Mm.
And that's noticeable. And there is like self-development point sequences. So if you're doing esoteric acupuncture as a practitioner, you should have a really solid sense of where the points and the geometries are in yourself. And there's a 37-point complex pattern that kind of starts at the top of the head and runs down the back and back up and over and down the front, and kind of does align with all those chakras and facial layers and things, and then pumps up the back and has all these internal head connections that just pop you out into a quite an expansive space very quickly. And
Mm.
by repeatedly practicing that, it's like you can just switch it on and walk around with it running all the time.
Mm.
And it's a lot about inner guidance and inner knowing and higher sensory perception and how to feel heart centered and how to feel aligned. Just if my head wants that and my heart wants that, it's not a happy place. So coming
Yeah.
back to central alignment just feels better.
Mm.
And I'll do that, if I'm faced with a tricky situation, or maybe I'm feeling just tired, or there's also like protective elements in it. So if I walk into a room where I feel like something's really off or something's going on here and I don't know what it is, that I can sort of just drop into that centeredness that comes with switching the pattern on. But the process of learning that 37-point sequence is, takes a little while and a bit of dedication because it's complex. But as you do it, all these things just seem to come up inside, but also in your life. And it's like loading up that coding allows some of those things to pop out and learn and experience different things and try things out.
It's fascinating.
So I will be a bit of spruiking myself a little bit here, but I will be putting out that 37-point meditation sequence as a online course by mid-year. So that'll be through the online academy, the 7 Stars Academy that I've just started working on. That'll have, it's really training for light workers and for healers and people that are doing self-development at this time, for personal change and also for planetary change to help with that evolution of values and increasing coping capacity, really, because we're faced with a lot of stuff at the minute. And, even that, how do I tell what's right and what's not right? And, there's all these fake news and misinformation and stuff going on. So being able to have a sense of what your heart says on any given situation is a helpful, in a compass to have.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking for more of that. Like I said, the period of time I've been going through is quite challenging, and that's one of the main kind of feelings I've had is this kind of realization of how much of my life has been led from the head space and starting to kind of connect with the heart space and realizing how much junk is in there that needs to be cried out and just continually.
Yeah, it's the time for it. Even like this time right now, we're in that sort of astrologically, we're in a time to face all that, heal it, and let it flow. If you look at the graves layers that you were talking to Steve about, moving into that 6th layer, that network centric, humanistic way of being human, it's the time to do a lot of that healing process.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many healing modalities popping up, and it's my feeling that using these light body geometries, I mean, they're not, I'm not saying it's the best thing and everyone has to do it, but I've found them really helpful personally after studying a lot of different things, and that they give a lot of grounding and solidness to the work. And because there is such a self-development focus, as well as this desire to heal other people, that it's a really solid, like, structured process. Because a lot of the healing I'm seeing out there can just be a bit fluffy, or a bit, it could be all talk, or it can be, oh yeah, I had a nice time, but then nothing really happened. Like, I didn't get the chance to make changes in my life, or it was over really quick, or something. Where this is like can be a discipline, as well as, definitely in the events I run, some people come because it's like they just like the experience, and they kind of feel high from it and that kind of thing.
Sure.
But the ones that really go and make changes in their life, or like can face the things that come up with more ease and more grace, then that's my happy time to see that happen.
So that kind of brings me to what I was thinking of asking you. It's kind of a two-part thing here. How important is it to practice or to have your attention, robust enough to be able to sort of like really focus and connect these points? Do you know what I'm trying to say? And not just kind of like, oh yeah, well, I think maybe I feel it, and then you're thinking about, here in the fridge in the background or whatever. And then also, just after that, if someone wanted to start this tonight, like myself, I do want to. If I wanted to practice that thing tonight, like, how would you give me a short rundown of how I'd go about doing that?
Yeah. So there's a few things in that. The first one is having a treatment from an esoteric acupuncturist is really helpful if you've got access to one. Partly because you know with confidence where the points are because you've had a pin stuck in them. So there's that element. There's also the transfer of information, whether that's they can describe the things more clearly to you or tune it more specifically for you. But there's also the subtle information transfer that happens when we're in direct contact with another human. So there are things that, if you can go and see someone, it's a good thing to do. But in terms of doing it yourself, I think having a visual guide is helpful, like being able to see a picture. So I'll send you a picture of that pattern I was describing. And that helps because it kind of locks in your visual cortex. When you are focusing on the points, it's pretty normal to get distracted, like your mind's jumping around. So what I tell people is watch where it goes, because sometimes it's really relevant to the pattern itself or the content or something for you to look at. Sometimes it is just random, the fridge is buzzing too loud, that kind of thing. So see what it is and then come back to the points. Same if people go into these really big expansive states. It can be safer too because they're grounded. They'll kind of like pin into the table, or they've got the points as reference, physical points on their body to come back to as a map or as breadcrumbs to find their way back. And to do the process yourself, it's nice to have a few approaches to it, having that the visual or written guide to follow, or even if when I get them out there, or audio recordings, or eventually animations and all that kind of stuff. It's awesome. It's in the plans to work with, but also just your felt sense. So rather than looking at the thing outside of yourself, but to feel inside, how is it to have my mind on that spot? If I place my mind in one hand for a couple of minutes and then put it in the other hand, do I feel different, or do I feel like a balance between them, or do I feel a sameness, or is there a tendency to have that proprioceptive sense of tilting or twisting or turning, and the space in between, between my head and my hands? Is there tension? Or if I put my mind in my heart, can I tune into those subtle sensations of the heart and sense? But if that's not working for you, can I visualize it? Because some people are really visual, or it might be very practical and physical, and you might just go, well, can I feel my clothing? Can I feel my heartbeat maybe, if I'm quiet enough? And tune into just physical sensation, knowing that if that's your configuration that you've got personally, that it can still be very effective because you're still activating that area. Where some people will get, massive story come up about, had one lady last night seeing dragons come out of her body and all this kind of stuff. That's fine. But also, can you relate that back to here and now? And she could really say, I was actually calling back in masculine elements within myself and these things. So I always bring it back to relevance in your life now, especially if people are having these quite strong, like even past life experiences or that sort of content pop up. Now, I tend to have a rational basis as much as I can and make things practical. Got a science degree and all that, so I tend to like to bring it back to the here and now, but allow for more than that.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you have a bit more time? Because there's some more things I'd love to ask you about.
Yeah, ask away. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I asked at the start of that maybe you didn't mention was, well, I guess you kind of did, but I'm just wondering, like, so you said it can be a discipline, like, it sounds like you could have a one-off experience that's pretty powerful, but how powerful is it? Like, do you try to practice some of this stuff daily, or especially if you're starting out and kind of working on the foundational stuff, is it good to kind of, even just as a short meditation, to kind of start to just get a feel for these things?
I think it is. It's like when I first started doing the 37-point Antakarana meditation, I did that every day for 100 days, and I followed a recording of someone talking through it, which I found repetitive and annoying after a few times of doing it, and which was fine. But just that, having it there on my phone so I could listen to it at any time, and I'll do it at roughly the same time every day. And that I'd notice, some days I'd zone out at this point, some days I'd be all right, and some days it would flow nicely here, and other days it wouldn't, and those kinds of things. You don't get to notice them or have the opportunity to if not doing it as a disciplined daily practice. It also gets quicker. So like that whole neurons that fire together, wire together, or any task that you do repetitively becomes easier, or gives you more headspace. If you've run that program a bunch of times, you know how it goes, so you can kind of look at it from other points of view, or you might see things in it that you'd not seen before, or engage that part of your mind that has to think about it and learn. And then once it kind of doesn't have to do that job anymore, new information can pop in for you. So, yeah, I like the 100 days idea for locking it in. Yeah, Mikio, who wrote the books on Esoteric Acupuncture, says that a 3-week or a 6-week cycle is a good amount of time between patterns. So he'll have people come every 3 weeks or 6 weeks for a top up, whether it's the same pattern or a new one. And they tend to be a sequential thing. So you might, get a small building block, and then the next time get the next building block, and build a larger sequence.
Do you want to stand up while you're doing these?
You can, yeah. So I quite like to run the patterns while I'm doing my standing Qigong practice. So I do some standing Zen meditation. And usually you're taught something like do all your postural awareness stuff, and then do a microcosmic orbit meditation where you breathe in up the spine and out down the front. And it's the polarity of yin and yang, and the up spine tends to feel penetrative and thrusting and yang and forceful, where the down the front exhalation tends to feel receptive and yin and gentle and condensing or receiving. And you get that experience with the breath and the spaces between the breath as well.
Is that where you're because it sounds very similar to the Spring Forest Qigong, and I was actually meaning to bring that
Probably
up. Is that
is.
where you're going
Yep.
from the third eye to the chest to the navel to the bottom through
Yep.
those points and breathing it, synchronizing it with your breath and sort of visualizing
It,
pushing the energy from one of the.
exactly. So that's one of the really foundational qigong practices that pops up in most qigong schools. So in Chinese or Taoist philosophy, there's the idea that the first cell, as it divided, created the central channels around the center of the front and the spine.
Mm-hmm.
And so to trace your awareness around that helps strengthen your field and your core psychology even, and create more flow and connection between the different layers of the fascia or the chakra levels. And those stopping points, whether they're on the chakras or just the main storage places of the third eye, the heart, and the navel or lower belly, you could see them like train stations, and the entire circuit as being the train line. So getting clear articulation of each of the points on the channels, but then the overall flow. And usually when people start doing that kind of thing, they'll be able to notice it feels blocked here, or it feels I can't bring my mind to that space. I skip it, or it's offline, or it feels really good through this area, or not so good through there. And that will usually indicate something that's going on with the greater energetics or posture or health or mind state in general.
Yeah. And so you tend to do this sort of meditation and do that moving of the energy, and then after that you kind of go to your esoteric work.
Yeah, now I tend to just jump straight to the esoteric work because a lot of it will follow the same pathway anyway. Like the 37-point meditation is like a expansion on that central channel. So the points and geometries for that main practice spin around the central channels. So they create tetrahedrons and pyramids and octahedrons and kind of like kite shapes and all of these things that spin and interact. Can act like an antenna system almost, and connect extra points and then wind them together in a certain way. And it kind of drops down the outside of the spine first and then thrusts back up the spine and loops together, then comes down the front and maps around the third eye and the jaw and all the sensory inputs, and then down through the throat centers and into the heart and around the navel. And each aspect of it has like a greater story associated, whether it's like karmic and ancestral healing, lineage healing, or opening those perceptual centers and processing and discernment of sensory information. And then it loops around, goes up the back with like quite a strong vertical thrusting, forceful energy up the spine, and sort of rings into the head and opens up the channels inside the head. So there's a main one between the suboccipital hollow at the base of the skull and the brainstem, and the base of the third eye point between the eyebrows. And that flushes out between the hemispheres. So you're imagining that area lighting up, and usually if you're doing it at the end of the meditation, you've got quite a strong felt sense of that happening. And then that creates a hyperconnection between the hemispheres of the brain. So with that comes that perspective shift, that you might have the opportunity to look at something or sense something from left brain instead of right brain, or the other way around. So or different perspective. Yeah.
So it sounds like part of the whole process is sort of assisting in the tier 1 to tier 2 kind of transition.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. That's my audience. They're the people that I'm really most keen to work with. I think the patterns can help at any stage, but especially bringing about those emerging or latent human capacities, especially around the higher sensory perception, shift in value systems, and elevating values. Whether that's being able to shift perspective and see something from a different point of view is really helpful in that Yeah.
And it seems like the story and the really structured, the geometrical aspect um, seems to maybe be a way to stabilize some of these higher energies.
Yeah, yeah, very much. Like when you're going through a change process and you go through that period of disorientation and crisis and all of those things, it's nice to have something that's solid and grounded and can be felt and can help you reorientate, up from down and left from right and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Real from not real. Yeah, and give you that sense of solidness and direction and all of those things. So that is a really important aspect. I think I look for depth in things, and I see a lot of depth in this in terms of the story of the points and the way the geometries can all spin. A lot of people practicing this work really don't do that, and that's absolutely fine. It still really works. You can just go through the point sequence, and I was for the first few years I was doing it, and just kind of like run the points in order and just follow the textbook and be a technician at it, and it still will bring about a pretty altered kind of experience, whether that's emotional shift or intense visuals or something. And even that on itself is a driver for change. We know that peak experiences, especially repeated peak experience, do help provide that vertical lift and internal growth. And it's also just new information. If you're having to adapt to say a psychedelic experience that you've just had, and it's opened your mind to something that you've never thought of or could experience before, then that adaptation is a evolutionary shift. You've had to take on more awareness of something and make sense of it. If someone smokes some DMT or something and has this experience of oneness, then they're 10 minutes later they're back and they're them again. You've got to go, well, I was just everything and now I'm this.
Yeah.
How the hell do I make sense of that? And what do I do with that information? And all of that's an evolutionary driver, absolutely.
And it seems like over time, an experience like that, like the peak DMT experience you just mentioned, it can be easy to think, well, I just had an experience, but a very short experience. But it seems like over time, it sort of creates this carrot that causes the parts of you that are kind of lagging behind to need to catch up or something, if that makes sense.
That's definitely something that happens. It's like that slinky effect. Like you just stretch the slinky out and now you get to see all the spaces in between. And that's, to me, part of the change process, first tier to second tier, is to go back through all of those first tier layers and clean them up, clean out, what's that old stuck trauma there, and make sense of it, whether that's find the wisdom in it or where's the lessons or where's the healing, and be able to take that information and use it in some beneficial way in your life, or use it to help others, use it as a sense of healing for yourself or accomplishment or having overcome something. And then being able to move forward in a new way, and going through each of those layers, and wherever they're messy or wherever they're out of tune, just bring them into the harmony, so you get that nice kind of choir of and that allows for that kind of flattening out that happens where the first tier can, it's been slinkied apart, it can then drop back down and be used and tuned to when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
That's my sense anyway.
Where the bottom of the slinky kind of gets pulled up.
Yeah.
And so then the second tier is like a
and they bounce.
Re-slinking.
It's a wave.
Yeah.
Especially if you shake it.
I think I'm gonna have to have a disclaimer at the start of this podcast from now on that anybody's got to look into the Graves model before they listen, because I just had Mitch on and then Steve on before that, and so I know that there's,
especially Steve, like he's like an expert on that stuff. I don't have anywhere near his knowledge. Like I listen to his podcast a lot, and I've been into Wilbur's work and the spiral dynamics work for a while but yeah, he's world class with his knowledge and lived experience of it as well. So highly recommend his work.
How long have you known Steve?
We first met back in around 2005 to 2007. In that period, he was living in Melbourne then, and I actually went to some of his classes. I was looking for a more local Tai Chi teacher because I was having to fly into state to train, and it just never really aligned. So around that time, I was just getting into my transpersonal counseling work and integral theory and some of these things, and we would have had a lot to chat about then outside the martial arts, but it just wasn't the time. The timing wasn't right, and we bumped into each other at various kung fu training camps and things like that. And it's really in the last maybe 3 years, 2.5 or 3 years, that we've been connecting more, especially over this Lightbody Activation, Esoteric Acupuncture kind of work, and going through periods in that time where we've worked quite closely and intensely on it, and hope to more as the distance shortens. I'm thinking about spending more time up in that part of the world. I love it up there.
Yeah,
it's a good bubble.
So did Mikio did he invent this stuff, or are there other people kind of a
so some of the things that he's working with, the embodied sacred geometry work, I see it pop up in other places. Like there's a healing modality called template, where they're looking at the new human energetic template using sacred geometry, and it looks similar. I've spoken to shamans and ayahuasqueros that have said they've seen the light body geometries. You look at Alex Gove's work and his artwork and other people who do visionary art, and they're depicting, some of the exact shapes that are in the esoteric acupuncture work.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that's popping up in several places. Mikio would say he didn't invent it, that he transmitted it. So his understanding and experience is that it was telepathically transmitted to him via one of the ascended masters, Dwa Kul, who also transmitted the Alex Bailey works and others, and as a guide for service to humanity. So that's his experience in meditation and so on, and visionary state, where he's given clear instructions on point sequences and meanings and things. And I've had that similar experience last year in a group setting, in a ritual setting. It wasn't with plant medicines, but it was with quite high energetic work and healing. I had a visionary transmission of a pattern, in a flash, like a DMT type of flash, where this pattern came through, and we were on an island, and I thought I was having a holiday and going to get lots of Tai Chi in and go for swims and stuff. And I was up to 3 a.m. writing this book every night, documenting this pattern.
That's the Metatron's cube.
Yeah, that's Metatron's cube. So it's a large front pattern that's designed to help deal with disruption. So Metatron's cube has all of the platonic solids in it, geometric forms which bring order out of chaos. And that's the intention for that pattern, is to help with major life disruption and find peace and order in it again.
Yeah,
and I
cool.
certainly have experienced that personally in my life since then as well. So
major disruption and needing to use the Metatron's cube.
It just came at the right time for me. A few life and family things going on that just needed that ability to breathe through it in a really powerful way, and it's really also about that shoring up of the energy field at the layer 6 of the Graves model. There's that movement towards self-healing and structure. So that really cohesive field that's created by Metatron's cube, the new encoding pattern, gives that sense of structure and ability to process stuff and clear out distortion, and bring back your clarity of thought and emotional stability and those sorts of things.
Yeah, reading through your ebook on that, and talking to you now about some of those other shape that you had mentioned, the beginner shape and stuff. I love the story and how the points really do sort of form. They communicate this story, and to me, I mean, that seems a super powerful aspect of it that I really appreciate.
Yeah, I love that too, and that they're not just a join the dot sequence, but they've got that vectoring that suggests there's more going on, and there's spin and there's flow, and with that just gives you know, even just to get your head around it and visualize the shapes is one thing, but then a lot of the time when I've got someone on the table and I just talk them through the basic patterns, they'll see a whole bunch of new shapes or new spins that I've never encountered and stuff going on outside. And other things. Sorry, I just got a call.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot that can happen, that's for sure. And yeah.
Oh, sorry, I glitched out there for a second. On one more thing I kind of wanted to ask you about. I know this is a long one, but I'm loving this, so I appreciate your time for sure.
I'm loving it too. Yeah.
Great. Something I heard you talk about on Future Sense actually, which is some of these frequency and vibratory kind of healing things, and one of them was a plate that vibrates at certain frequencies that works kind of non-locally with DNA. Maybe you could explain what this thing is, where it comes from, how it works. I'm really fascinated.
Yeah, sure. So there's a whole new generation of frequency medicine coming about now. So whether that's like sound healing through tuning forks or various things. The machine I've got is a Spooky 2. It's quite a simple machine. It's basically a piece of engineering kit, a signal generator that can generate a huge number of different waveforms and different frequency pulses and amplitudes. And in combination with a database that's open source, which is one of the reasons I like it, you can pick appropriate to treat certain conditions. And these are databases that are based on, there's a naturopathic database and meridian databases and the Rife frequencies, which Royal Rife exposed. He was looking for a new microscope and he exposed bacteria and viruses to certain frequency pulses with light pulses. And he saw that at specific bands that the bacteria would glow, but once he got them exactly on that, they'd go through apoptosis and explode. So those frequency sets are in there as well. And the machine I've got can output through a range of different outputs. You can use light, you can use a cold laser, you can use a PEMF, a magnetic field generator, you can use a Panatron tube or a plasma array which puts out a field about the size of a Wi-Fi router. You can use TENS pads and run them onto muscles, or you can even use alligator clips and put the alligator clips on needles and apply them directly to points. So you're applying new information to the points. And you can also use it as a diagnostic tool. So you can use it and apply a frequency range whilst having a heart rate variability monitor on and seeing where your heart rate variability shifts according to the frequencies that are generated, and then use that as a diagnostic tool to get a more individualized treatment plan, or even as a diagnosis for maybe suggest you go and get some heavy metal testing or some, maybe some blood tests on certain things. So I wouldn't rely on it on its own yet, but this emerging technology, I mean, there's a bunch of crackpots. If you get on the forums and stuff for Spooky 2, you'll see stuff that will just be like, yeah. So use your discernment, but there's really good coming out of it as well. And one of them is this non-local device, as you're describing. So it's a sandwiched dual scalar transmitter system that you put a piece of DNA sample in, like a fingernails typically used. The new sample digitizers have, you can put blood samples in it and things. And it works remotely through bioresonance. So when your DNA is exposed to it, because you're carrying that same information coding in your DNA, it works through quantum entanglement. So like energy fields process the same way. So that exposure to your DNA sample can affect at a distance. And I've found it personally quite noticeable, especially, I go through periods where my subtle discernment's fairly on point, at least I feel it is. And I've been able to put the Spooky 2 device running a certain frequency set and be able to pick up which part of the body is it working on and have that through confirmation and go and check, that's exactly where the pattern was at, or have it switch off on the timer and know exactly through feeling in my body when that's happened. So it's really interesting. Yeah. It's a nice piece of equipment, and they're really cheap. Like they're like $200 or $300 US or something like that for this thing. I just got out of interest, and you can get these bioresonance devices that are like $40,000, and this one's can do most of that stuff for a couple of $100. It's really good, and then being open source as well allows for contribution by anyone, which is also wrought with problems, but it means that you get a lot of information in there, so it's also very useful.
So does it hook up with a computer as far as for
so you can just use the device on its own and just dial in what frequencies you want. I rarely do that. I mean, at acupuncture school, we learn to do that with TENS pads and needles and things for like muscle release. We'd put electrostimulation through muscles or through, say someone's got broken ribs, have to thread needles along and run a pulse between them. So you can do that just on the machine. But the databases are what's most interesting. The last time I looked at the database, it had a whole bunch of new plant medicine information in there. So someone had worked out or recorded or run through the sample digitizer, psilocybin mushrooms and DMT and LSD and all these things. And because I'm interested in working with altered states, I thought that was quite interesting as another tool to use in the kit. So I haven't done a huge amount of experimentation with those set frequencies, as yet, but that's definitely on the cards. I'm interested.
So what's the idea behind that exactly? They're somehow getting the frequency of the compounds in those substances, and then using those frequencies to have some effect on the sample of DNA.
Yeah, so a lot of people using the Spooky 2 are using it for this psycho-spiritual development, meditation and various things, as well as people using it for cancer treatment and all sorts of stuff. So the first time I saw something like that, it was essential oils. They'd listed a whole range of essential oil frequencies, and they put them through a sample digitizer that I'm not sure exactly how it works, but there's a little black box you put your sample in, and it will do an analysis of it of some sort and tell you what the resonant frequency is. And some of them, if you then get that resonant frequency and type it back into the database, it won't say that. I'm making one up, but you might go for like sandalwood and it will say however many hertz, and you put that number in and it will actually say, oh, that's for neck pain, or
sure,
issues or something like that, that there might not be an immediate relationship between those things. But they also have frequency sets. So I know the DMT one's got like 6 or 9 different frequencies that it kind of plays them in a sequence. And I have had a go at that using the TENS pads and had a mild kind of altered states, nothing like ingesting or smoking DMT would be like, but useful at a practical level and much less intense and more manageable. And useful in a session. If someone was maybe a bit emotionally stuck or finding it hard to soften and relax, applying those frequencies would be useful. You can also output the frequency pulses into like on an output plate and put a water sample on there. And we did that and make drops and sprays and like vibrational essences and things like that.
Mm.
And with good success. Like one of my daughters has a mild allergic reaction to some sort of insect bites, and we haven't quite nailed what it is. She can't deal with antihistamines very well. She gets a blood nose. So, you know, her elbow was almost swelling up to the point she couldn't bend her arm. And I put a drop of the antihistamine that had been through the machine as a sample, output it onto a sample of water, and put a drop of the water on her bite, and the redness visibly disappeared. And you know, maybe it was suggestion or placebo effect or something. Regardless, it had the desired outcome. So I'm happy.
Yeah,
For now, not understanding exactly what went on. Yeah,
definitely. That's cool. So with the DMT or any of these psychoactive substance frequencies, you're using the like stimulation pads with those?
Yep. So way I've tended to use that in sessions with people has been on TENS pads, and I'll run it through a particular point generally because I know it's effective and safe. Is on the wrist, on the inner wrist, a point called Naguan, which is inner gateway. So stimulating that point on its own has the psychological effect of helping people look at what's going on the inside. You know, the name inner gate means look at what's going on inside. So without the frequency aspect, just stimulating those points also will assist in that process. But then adding in, especially because I'm, you know, informed consent, I'll only do that kind of work with people that are interested in it.
Yeah.
And know about it. Even probably the suggestion that this is what's going to happen will also help create if that it happens. I totally acknowledge that. And a lot of pharmacy medicine works the same way. You know, my dad's a GP, and I know a lot of people in the medical profession that also will say that a lot of what they do is placebo effect.
Yeah.
So it could be that's what's going on.
But you might say that just a lot of reality in general is based on that same concept.
Yeah, what your internal belief systems are will determine how you experience the world a lot of the time. And I will say it's not the same thing. It wouldn't be the same as, you know, having a cup of ayahuasca and in a shamanic setting and all that sort of thing. It's not that experience, but it is definitely a nice, gentle altered state, as acupuncture can be on its own as well, or meditation. You know, some of my, especially my early psychedelic experiences that I call psychedelic were in meditation, rather than plant medicine experiences or other things.
Well, it seems to me like we're kind of in a stage of time where it's kind of like anything we can get it's going to help ease the transition and help people continue to move through stuff is going to be needed. So
those ways of changing our state, you know, that are more useful than, you know, coming home from a job you hate and throwing down 3 beers or 6 beers or whatever people do to not hate their lives so much. You know, it's something that's more useful than that and constructive and moving towards wholeness and health and happiness. And bringing about more of that love vibe is I keep coming back to it, but it's a good one. It's useful. And it can definitely help make the world a better place, and if not change the external world, at least if you can change your own internal experience, then you'll feel in a more beneficial way of being. You know, I know for myself, if I've been doing some meditation and those sorts of things, my world is much nicer. My actions, words, interactions are nicer, and I'm nicer to be around. So it comes back.
And that usually has a ripple effect in at least at a bare minimum the people that are closest to you in your life.
Yep, spot on. And I mean, we do know it affects the collective as well through that 100th monkey type of effect, or, you know, the studies that were done, population studies on crime rate and so on, and you know, the early ones that were done in Washington, where they'd have 1,000 meditators getting together and meditate on world peace for an hour and see the crime rate drop. It's amazing and interesting.
it's kind of like the what you were mentioning with, when I asked if Mikio invented the stuff, and it's like, well, no, it's just kind of popping up in different places. It feels like a similar sort of thing, if you're doing a thing and working on yourself and getting yourself to a certain state, you can imagine that there's, just as an example, like 10 other of you in different
Yes.
parts of the world, all kind of lighting up at the same time,
Yeah. And I'd love to take this work into that sort of arena and have a way of collectively focusing on the points together. Because I know the groups I run with, 10, 12 people in them, are much more powerful than if I do the work on myself, and much more powerful for the individuals in the group. And with the technology available today, there's no reason that couldn't be done, online or through some app or through some, virtual world where we meet up and light the points up on each other and ourselves. And all of these things are possible and in the works. So
yeah, so it sounds like you've got some cool stuff in the works. So are you just going to be doing like guided meditations and animations and stuff for the more complex stuff, or are you going to kind of go through all the progression?
yeah, it's time for me now to go back to the start and do like a solid structured step by step progression. I've written a outline for a 2-year diploma level course. So I've started delivering some of the modules for that, just to tune them up and get them happening so that I'm happy with them. And I'm starting to film some content for that. So I've got workshops coming up in Byron Bay at the end of April, and in Townsville in Far North Queensland at the start of May. And like I'm presenting the work at some music festivals. I've had a lot of experience now presenting this work to different audiences, so I kind of feel like I'm getting a more integral way of explaining it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I really want to do like a step by step progressive cumulative kind of teaching program for it that can be personal development, but also have a parallel stream that can be practitioner training, where people would have to do case studies and all that kind of stuff as well to get the stamp of approval to say you can go out there and do this training and practice it. And ideally, like I'm mainly working with people that are already in the healing profession. So whether you're doing acupuncture or kinesiology or Reiki or massage or counseling or something, like I'm working with some psychologists and others that aren't really in the energy healing field that can still use the points and that story aspect. And it doesn't have to be seen through one particular filter only.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how long do you think, if you have a rough idea, that until anything like this might go live?
Yeah, so I'm expecting by mid-year to have the website sevenstaracademy.com.au up and live with useful content on it. At the moment, it's a bit bare, but that content's a lot of it's written already. It's just getting it up there, and because filming live is always brings up new and interesting things, and you get questions and feedback, and it's much more interesting than me just standing there in front of a camera. That I'll try and film as much of it live as possible. So like those workshops are April, May, so it's going to be at least another month before they're edited. So yeah, it'll be mid-year, and there'll be some good stuff on there. And depending on funding and other things, the app, I'd like to see at least a 1.0 version of that by the end of the year, whether that's just a kind of a video playback or something like that, of an animation and so on. And it's not that hard to do with a guided meditation. I've been recording guided meditations for a couple of years now, and I've got sort of a stockpile that I could just put them up really soon.
Nice.
But yeah, I'd like to do that. Yeah,
Very
ASAP.
cool. I'm looking forward to that for sure. Well, I'm sure there are plenty of other things I could sit and chat with you about, but I don't want to keep you forever. I'd love to have you on again sometime.
Yeah,
just
yeah.
to chat anytime, because yeah,
it's great being able to talk to people that can hear me as well and listen. Yeah, then I love your show, and I've been listening to it for a bit now, and you get some really interesting people on. So yeah,
cool. Thanks, man.
keep connected.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks again for taking the time to chat with me. It was awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure, Jacob. Thanks for having me.